Christmas is literally around the corner now, but as we've discovered over the last few weeks, the news cycle doesn't stop for anyone, but it will stop for us, at least until the end of New Year's, because we'll be taking a break after this episode for the Christmas period. But before that, we do have a good amount of news to get through, because interesting things have continued to happen in the world of video games. So, for one last time in 2021, let's get into this. Hi, I'm Prob, and welcome to News Trash here on the Geek Show, your regular look at the more interesting things that have been happening in the world of video games over the last few days. Now, before we go any further with this episode, if you like the content that we're making and you like what we're doing with these videos, then please do consider hitting that subscribe button and supporting the channel, helping us grow and reach more people. Thank you. So, kicking off today's episode is an interesting report that's come from Axios about an apparent unprecedented exodus of developers from Ubisoft. Now, many people who follow the news will probably have seen reference to this report on any number of video games news sites, and I find it really interesting because Axios have spoken to people who are still working at Ubisoft, many of whom have come up with their own names for this migration of developers away from Ubisoft, calling it either the Great Exodus or the Cut Artery or some similar name to that. Now, there have been any number of resignations from any number of developers over 2021 in the video games world. Ubisoft seem to have suffered more than most other companies, with the noted exception of, say, Activision Blizzard recently. Now, Ubisoft employs over 20,000 people across their global network of studios, and a number of people have described the flow of goodbyes as something that they've never seen before. Take, for example, Far Cry 6. Of the top 25 credited people from that game, 5 have left the company. And from the top 50 credited people on last year's biggest title for Ubisoft, which was Assassin's Creed Valhalla, 12 of them have left the company. Mid-level and lower-level workers have also been dropping like flies, particularly in Ubisoft's large and normally growing Canadian studios. Data from LinkedIn has shown that Ubisoft's Montreal and Toronto studios have each lost about 60 workers within the last 6 months. And according to 2 current developers, the departures have stalled or slowed projects. One developer recently said a colleague currently at Ubisoft contacted them to solve an issue with a game because no one was still there who knew the system. So is this an exodus from Ubisoft? Maybe, but I don't think that the company as a whole needs to panic at the moment, and the main reason for that is their size and the amount of money that they have. Now, Axios did actually interview the head of People Ops at Ubisoft, Annika Grant, who told Axios that the attrition rate today is a few percentage points above where it typically is, but it's still within industry norms. Now, according to LinkedIn, Ubisoft's attrition rate is 12%, which is lower than Activision Blizzard's, which is 16%, but higher than Epic Games, Take-Two and EA, which ranges from 7 to 9%. Now, there are more details, more aspects to this report that are actually really interesting to read through. I will link it in the description below. I wouldn't say Ubisoft are in a crisis at the moment. I'd say that's more on the doorstep of Activision Blizzard, but I wouldn't say that Ubisoft employees are particularly happy with the company. One of the reasons for that are NFTs. Now, a lot of Ubisoft staff don't actually understand Ubisoft's push for NFTs and their inclusion in video games. Ubisoft recently announced the launch of their in-game NFT platform called Quartz, and they also announced that they were going to be doing a test sale of NFTs within Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Breakpoint. That hasn't really gone well, with only about 15 NFTs being sold, which has basically brought in less than $1,800. That's offset somewhat by the fact that Ubisoft did give away a lot of NFTs for free. Another aspect of why it's offset is the fact that this is actually a test case, so the NFTs are linked to the Ubisoft account itself, so they can't really be moved away from Ubisoft's environment, and because of that, a lot of people aren't really interested in Ubisoft's NFTs. Ubisoft's blockchain technical director, Didier Genevois, recently did an interview with Decrypt, which is a website that's dedicated to demystifying the decentralized internet. So it explains things like blockchain and cryptocurrency, NFTs, that sort of thing. It's an interesting website to visit every now and then if you have questions. Anyway, in that interview, Didier Genevois did state that they've received lots of feedback since the announcement and that the management at Ubisoft heard both the encouragement and the concerns. He goes on to say, "We understand where the sentiment towards the technology comes from, and we need to keep taking it into consideration every step of the way." He goes on to state that this experiment is meant to understand how the value proposition of decentralization can be received and embraced by our players. We know it is a major change that will take time, but we will stay true to our 3 principles, which according to him are: use the tech responsibly and build a safe environment, only leverage energy-efficient proof-of-stake blockchains, and focus on meaningful value propositions for players that benefit their gaming experience, which is bullshit. And the reason why I know that is because the CEO of Ubisoft, Yves Guillemot, compared the backlash that came with the announcement of NFTs to the same backlash that came with microtransactions and loot boxes, both of which are technologies that have been implied in-game that are to the detriment of the game in many cases. Now, he held a video Q&A to try and reassure developers about the company's controversial new push, and according to multiple sources who were in attendance, his answers were vague and leaned on buzzwords like metaverse and Web 3.0. He left a lot of the people disheartened by the company's latest PR disaster as before. Now, a lot of people hate microtransactions and a lot of people hate loot boxes. They have rightly been penalized by many governments, so I don't understand why Ubisoft as a company would double down on something that has been so heavily criticized and use it as an example for their new technological push. This is a prime example of the hubris and arrogance of a lot of the people who sit at the top echelons of these big video game publishers and developers. They basically look down on common gamers and think, we know what you want, we used to be gamers at one point, but you stopped being gamers a long time ago and times have changed. What gamers want is to keep things simple. So why not just do that? You don't need to overcomplicate things. Gamers aren't really complicated. They just want to get into the game, have fun, enjoy it with their friends if they're playing multiplayer games, or enjoy it by themselves if they're playing a single-player game. They don't need all of this extra paraphernalia applied to it. Just let them have fun. If you do that, I guarantee you they will keep buying your games because they enjoy playing them. You don't need to keep hammering at their wallets or use the same tactics that other companies use just to try and take as much of their money as possible, because all you do is bleed them dry and they can no longer afford to play your games. It's really that simple, and I don't understand why people who are supposedly good at business don't understand this. Have these people become so greedy for gamers' money that they've basically blinded themselves to any possibility of actually releasing good, complete games on time, paying developers a decent wage, improving working conditions, things like that, things that are just normal for any other company in any other industry. Anyway, mini rant over. The global chip shortage has been causing all sorts of problems. The pandemic has been causing all sorts of problems. Supply chains are shot to bits all over the world, and everyone has kind of been suffering because of it in one way or another. But I don't think anyone actually realizes just how bad the situation has become. So maybe this will put it into perspective. Microsoft couldn't actually hold the first Halo Championship Series over the weekend for Halo Infinite because they couldn't get hold of retail Xbox Series X consoles, which is quite a damning indictment about the situation with global supply chains. Now, 343 Industries esports and viewership lead, Tashi, announced in a tweet that players would be playing on Series X development consoles, which function identically to normal retail models, And the reason for that was the global supply chain shortage being a reality. It's not just Microsoft who have suffered from this. AO World boss John Roberts recently told the press that the availability of PS5 and Xbox Series X and S consoles was difficult this Christmas, and in October, Intel warned the ongoing global semiconductor shortage could continue on to 2023. So what else has been happening? Well, Final Fantasy VII Remake got ported over to the PC. It was released a few days ago, and it was selling for 70 quid. The first PC game to sell for that amount as standard. This is just the normal edition of the game, not a collector's edition or a premium edition or anything like that, just the normal edition. The problem is that, according to journalist Alex Battaglia of Digital Foundry, the game isn't worth the price. In his first tweet, the day after the game's release on the Epic Games Store, he says, "As I mentioned, I am not covering FF7R, yet the stutters that happen as you immediately get in-game rendered graphics are just unacceptable. Anyone testing and playing this game on PC before release should surely realize that your cinematic game should not do that." The evidence of all this stuttering was further corroborated by John Linneman, another Digital Foundry journalist, who stated that the smooth presentation was central to its storytelling and this version compromises it. Alex Battaglia concluded his thoughts on the game and its release on the PC on Resetro with the statement, "I humbly submit that no one should buy it. This is literally the worst AAA release I have seen on PC in a good long time." Speaking of awful releases, Cyberpunk. Now, Pavel Sasko, who is the quest director for Cyberpunk 2077, was recently on a live stream and was asked a very particular question. Why doesn't Cyberpunk feature police chases? Instead of responding to this in a good and positive way, he pushed back on the idea that open world games need to have these encounters in the first place. According to his statement in the live stream, "I don't think that the Sonic or the Elden Ring open world game will have it, and while some assumed that this was an attempt at a joke, it hasn't really gone down well with the fans." He went on to say that the real reason for the lack of car chase mechanics was an inability to get it working in the game before launch, and that they eventually gave up on having it. Which seems a bit weird, because it's a mechanic that already exists within video games. If you look at games like Need for Speed or Driver or Grand Theft Auto, any of those games have car chase mechanics. All you do is change the skin of the car that's chasing you. So it should be something that they should have been able to implement. But then again, they may not have been able to apply it because of just how ambitious Cyberpunk was in the first place. I think more transparency on this might be interesting. Okay, moving on to something that may become a regular section, I am not sure. But it's basically who bought who. So, who bought who this week? Well, Swedish holdings firm Embracer Group, who own the likes of Saber and Koch Media and various others like that, they've been going around buying all sorts of companies again. Recently they bought MMO publisher Perfect World Entertainment for $125 million. That also included Cryptic Studios, who are best known for MMOs like Neverwinter and Star Trek Online. They also bought Digic Holdings, which is a Hungarian animation studio. There was no purchase price for that announced. Other companies that they bought include Spot Film Networks and Shiver Entertainment. But I think the big scalp of this week is Dark Horse Media. Now this makes a big change for Embracer because for a lot of their purchases, they've stuck specifically to video games. And even the ones where the company focuses on animation can still be applied to video games. But this is a big step into a new world for them. Dark Horse Media are attached to some legendary comic book franchises, including the likes of Hellboy, but there's also been various live-action movies based on Dark Horse properties. So, is that an angle that Embracer are going to head into? Are they eventually going to be making movies based on video games and comics? Are we going to see more video games based on comic book characters? Because now that they own Dark Horse Media, they have a wealth of characters and stories to choose from that could rival Marvel's universe and DC's universe in terms of the comics and the cinematic universes. In other news, big congratulations to Hades for being the first video game ever to win a Hugo Award. Now, a lot of gamers probably aren't aware of what a Hugo Award is. It is one of the premier awards for science fiction and fantasy writing, and any author who writes science fiction and fantasy would love to win one. Okay, it's not as prestigious as things like the Man Booker Award or the Pulitzer Prize or even the Nobel Prize for Literature. Those are the big awards, but the Hugo Award is very specific in that it only focuses on science fiction and fantasy. And if you are a science fiction and fantasy author, it's one of those things that really raises you above everybody else within those genres. So for Hades to win for its writing is just amazing. It beat the likes of The Last of Us Part 2 and Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now, in his acceptance video, Supergiant Games writer and creative director Greg Kasavin said he and the team were incredibly honoured to be the first recipient of the Hugo Award's Best Video Game accolade. Video game storytelling has come a long way over the years, he said. You can really inhabit these worlds and see how it reacts to your every move. And at Supergiant, we've tried to marry the tradition of fantasy and science fiction literature with that unique interactive component to create these worlds that feel as though they are alive. We're so grateful our work on Hades has stood out in this way, and we hope that the Hugo Awards continue to recognise the amazing work being done in this space. And it's a testament to the quality of writing in Hades that they won. Now, the awards focus specifically on things that came out the year before, so hopefully next year when it comes to the Hugo Awards, Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker will be in the running for that, because the writing in that expansion is stunning. To be able to take 10 years of storytelling and tie it all up, as well as laying crumbs for the future avenues that the game could explore, that's next level writing. So our final piece of news for this episode, and indeed for 2021, Bandai Namco have registered another Klonoa trademark, this time in the UK. The Klonoa Fantasy Reverie series could suggest a return for the publisher's cult platformer, which I personally would love to see, because they've already registered a Klonoa Encore trademark in Japan in 2019, along with Mr. Driller Encore and Splatterhouse Encore, and I would really like to see a return of Klonoa. It's one of those video games that a lot of modern gamers don't really know, but Klonoa is just a joy of a platformer, and if you've never played the game, it is well worth finding and playing. We are at the end of the episode, so I'm going to bid you a fond farewell for now. I will be back with more News Trash in the new year. Until then, thank you for keeping me company this year. Thank you for watching our episodes of News Trash. Have a very Merry Christmas, have a very Happy New Year, and I will see you all very soon.